on the bottom of the Zoom. I am seeing a couple of questions about this Zoom view looks different than normal. Yes, it is set to webinar version, so it is a little bit different. Feel free to send in your Q&A. We'll have time at the end to answer any questions, and feel free to submit things throughout. But first of all, thank you all so much for being here. I'm seeing a bunch of names I am familiar with, and those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Britt. I work with our TL program here at Lambda. So great to have you all. And basically, just to do a quick little intro, we're thrilled to be able to kick off this speaker series. We're going to be hosting monthly sessions for students and alumni to create a space to answer questions and share advice, as well as some practical tips and how-tos from women working in the industry. And I want to take a few minutes to introduce Amanda Lane. She was a former SL who had come up with this idea initially, and so I just want to turn it over to her for a few minutes.
Thank you, Britt. Hi, everyone. A few months ago, I set out to build a stronger sense of community for women students at Lambda School, and I saw a need for women to hear from empowered members of the tech community who may have faced similar adversities and challenges as some of us, and learn from their experiences working in the industry. This is a starting point, and we're excited to continue to grow and develop this program. So thank you all for being here today and supporting our mission.
Thanks, Amanda. And currently, as many of you know, women hold fewer than 1 in 5 chief information or technology officer positions at leading companies in the US, according to recent analysis. And other recent data showed that only 5% of CTOs on LinkedIn are women. And at Lambda School, we are thrilled to be able to introduce Namrata Ganatra. She joined Lambda this summer as our CTO, and she is absolutely incredible. And we're thrilled to have her be able to share a little bit about her personal and professional journey with all of you. So as Lambda's CTO, she is leading the build of Lambda School's technology, and she joined us after leading engineering and product teams at Coinbase and PayPal, Facebook, and Microsoft, among others. And she sits on the Forbes Technology Council and is the founder of the Ashia Foundation, which is a nonprofit with a mission to educate and empower women of all ages, races, and religions. She holds a bachelor's in computer science, information technology from the University of Mumbai, and taken professional master's computer science graduate courses from Stanford, and attended programs at Harvard Business School Online and Stanford University Graduate School of Business. So we are thrilled to be able to introduce her to all of you and give you all the opportunity to ask your questions and hear a little bit about her story. So with that, I will turn it over to Kathleen and Namrata.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Britt. Britt just went over a lot of ways that you're involved in the tech community, Namrata, both as a professional and as an individual. And would love to hear just a little bit more about how you first became interested in the computer science field and when and how you decided that was the path for you.
Sure. First of all, it's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me, you all. I am really grateful to be speaking in front of you all. Thank you, Britt, for a kind introduction, and Amanda for suggesting the speaker series. So I'm Namrata. I'm the CTO of Lambda School. Kathleen, to answer your question, what got me interested in computer science was really more of a intuition and passion, and kind of lack of data points in computer science. So I would say I grew up in Mumbai in India in late 90s. And at that time, I just didn't have any exposure to computer programming or technology in general. We kind of didn't even have a television at our home. But I remember when I was in middle school, I read about Microsoft's Windows 98 launch in kind of physical newspaper. It talked about Microsoft's vision of having computer on every desk and at every home, and how personal computers would automate jobs in the future. So that intrigued my curiosity in computer field. And I thought to myself that this is the future of technology. And I kind of dreamt of, working at Microsoft someday. So when it came time to decide what I wanted to study after high school, I didn't want to waste any time doing generals. I knew I wanted to study computer science. And my parents particularly didn't know what to make of this choice, because computer science or technology wasn't popular back in the days. And like most Indian parents, they wanted me to study medicine and become a doctor. but nevertheless, they supported my decision of choosing my own path. And at that point, after high school, I decided to enroll in a program called Diploma in Computer Technology, since I was not old enough to enroll in degree course.
That's great to hear. How did you, considering you had relatively limited access to technology, were there things that you were able to do before you graduated from high school just to kind of start to immerse yourself in the field a little bit more that helped you make that decision?
There was absolutely no resources available to me, and not even books or access to computers. So no, I just didn't have any resources. It was more of, intuition based, reading about Microsoft 98 launch and hearing the vision of Microsoft, that there will be a personal computer on every desk and every home. And I just kind of believed in that mission and dreamt myself of, automating a lot of jobs using computers. So no, I didn't do any prep work. It was basically a decision that I wanted to, it was kind of more of, I just jumped into the opportunity, I would say, without any data points or access to computer or books.
How did you, how was that transition then, going from kind of no background, no experience, no access to that technology, and then immersing yourself in it fully? How was that transition for you?
It was very hard. I didn't know what I was getting into, to be honest. But as I said, when I decided computer science, it was super early on, right after my high school. My family supported it, but the problem was for that transition that my parents couldn't afford my CS schooling, because I grew up in middle class family. I had 3 siblings. There was no money left to send me to school to study computer science. So I had to find another way. And for me, that meant kind of finding education scholarships that would allow me to afford tuitions for my computer science schooling. It was really an eye-opening transition period and experience for me, because at that time in India, and maybe even now, scholarships were based on race, gender, and religion. My mom and I would go to offices of trustees and, houses of wealthy people to find application forms for scholarship. And every year, for the 6 years that I studied computer science, I had to qualify and line up for 10 to 15 application scholarships to just get through my tuition for computer science. And then I was able to do that, fortunately, but I lived through the fear of not being able to afford my education every year. When I got into the diploma in computer technology, it really taught me the basic of programming and technology fundamentals. And I still remember the day when I typed my first Hello World program in C. I was really in love with it. I couldn't stop talking about it at home. I stayed late evenings in college. And then I typed programs in computer lab after everyone else left for home, right? It was because I didn't have access to computer. So I would say during those years, programming languages were really basic and low-level programming languages like C, C++, so that needed me to understand the computer science fundamentals in more details. And the way I did that was, just learning through books and writing programs on a notepad, since I didn't have access to computer, and then went back every day in the morning to school and ran those programs and see if it worked or debugged it. So that was my transition, I would say, from not knowing anything about computers to kind of learning in the evenings and then getting access to it during the daytime.
I cannot imagine writing code on a notepad and then having to retype it into a computer. So that is pretty amazing to hear. Could you share a little bit more about your career journey that took you from school up until the time that you joined Lambda School?
Absolutely. It's a long career journey, and that tells you guys, and I'm a little bit older. So I would say, through kind of tremendous hard work from my entire family and with the help of scholarships, I graduated at the top of my class in University of Mumbai back in 2005. At that time, my friends were joining large companies to get the experience, but I really didn't want to go in that direction. my philosophy is, I often do things that I'm passionate about, even if it's against the flow, whether it was deciding to do computer science right after high school, even if nobody was doing it, or it was joining a startup after my bachelor's in computer science. That was the path that I chose because I believed in it. So instead of joining a big company, I decided to join a small startup in India that was a vendor to Microsoft. And I particularly chose that startup because I wanted to work for Microsoft, even if that meant indirectly. And luckily, my company was impressed with my work. And a year later, they sponsored my work visa to the US, where I worked on site in Seattle during the daytime. And then during the night, I worked with my team back in India to implement those requirements and projects execution. So I did that for a couple of years. After that, Microsoft hired me full time to work directly with them. And that was really a dream come true, right? I started my entire journey of joining them one day, and Microsoft making an offer to me to join them full time in Seattle. I would say that was the best day in my entire career of my dream coming true. And at Microsoft, again, I was fortunate to put on a brand new team to build a subscription billing platform or a usage-based billing platform. Subscriptions, as you guys know, are really common now these days for almost all e-commerce platforms. But back in the days, it was a very new concept. And I was lucky to start my career in a small founding team at Microsoft instead of being put on a big team such as Windows or Office. So I was one of the key engineers on their billing platform. I learned a lot from my peers. I was a junior engineer on the team. I learned a lot about technical design, architecture, how big companies do things, and moreover, like evaluating and working with third parties, because Microsoft worked with thousands of third parties as a big company. So that was a tremendous experience. And my career was really thriving in Seattle. I earned Microsoft Award for High Potential Employees 2 years in a row while I was working there. So everything was going great. But then it was 2009, and it was the middle of recession. Jobs were really scarce. So at that time, my fiance, and now my husband, graduated from University of Washington in Seattle, and he couldn't find a job in Seattle given that jobs were so few. So he got a job in the Bay Area, and that got me here to the Bay Area. So I decided to move to Bay Area in 2010, and that was basically, I would say, a defining moment for my career, because I thought to myself that Bay Area is all about startups, and I wanted to experience that. So when I moved here, I quit Microsoft, joined a small mobile payment startup, which was a drastic move for me at that time, because it was not only kind of moving from a big company to working at a small startup, which is a very different experience, but also it was kind of moving from working on a Microsoft .NET technology stack to an open source Java technology stack. So there was a lot for me to kind of learn and get settled into, and which took like 3+ months. But then after that, I was off to the races. After the startup experience, it got eventually acquired by PayPal in 2011. And going through that acquisition and successful startup exit early on really opened my eyes for tons of opportunities here in the Bay Area that I had not experienced in Seattle. So it was a great learning experience for me going through that acquisition and then working at PayPal for a couple years, where I led their digital goods division for and led the large team. So that was my transition from being an individual contributor and engineer to being kind of able to manage and lead large team. After that, I decided to leave PayPal and join Facebook. And again, my career there was really starting with a small team of 4 people and growing the team to really 60, 70 people engineering team that I led at Facebook, building everything payments, and that makes money at Facebook. And that was a great learning experience for me because, Facebook was the first company where it was more about moving fast at large scale. So spent 3 years at Facebook, and then last year I was at Coinbase, again with my experience of being in financial services. Blockchain is one of the disrupting technology. in the recent years in financial services. So I wanted to work on a cutting edge technology stack, which is why I joined Coinbase, which is a top crypto exchange in the US, and building the open financial system for the world. What got me to Lambda is that when I was at Coinbase, I was not looking for a job. It was mostly, there were a bunch of mutual friends who were tweeting about Lambda. Of course, Lambda is famous on Twitter. So I found out about Lambda through that, just landed on Lambda's website, and then learned about the mission, our mission of making education accessible and risk-free. And my immediate reaction was that, having gone through the education struggle myself, I would have personally gone through a school like Lambda School for my engineering education if it exists in India. So there are so rare opportunities to build a product and build something that you would personally use yourself, which was the case for me at Lambda School. So I decided to jump the ship, and here I am, just being grateful to talking to all of you.
I'd love to dig into one of the things that you said, which you went from, after working at Microsoft, which is a huge technology company, moving into the startup realm. And you mentioned specifically having to learn entirely new technical skills in order to ramp up into that role. How did you navigate that transition as someone going from different technologies, totally different environment, different geographic location? How did you advocate for yourself during that interview process and really highlight your transferable skills to help you make that transition into a new company, knowing that there would be a significant amount of time where you would have to build up those new skills to be ready to start contributing to the team?
Yeah, I think for me, it was the way I highlighted was highlighted the experience that I would be able to bring from Microsoft to a startup. So that means, working in a large team, working cross-functionally with thousands of dependencies like Microsoft would have, and working at a startup and being able to bring that skill set that, hey, I've led and executed projects at such a large scale, and I'm sure that would be beneficial to a startup as we scale. So highlighting that experience was an important aspect of me interviewing at a startup. The second aspect of it was understanding the fundamentals of the entire payments and fintech industry. At Microsoft, I built the subscription-based billing platform, which is again billing and payments, and which is highly correlated with the mobile payments startup that I was interviewing with. So those are the skills that I highlighted that the startup was missing, and I knew I would be able to contribute and add value to the company right away. I was also transparent in my interview stage, which was more of like, look, I know computer science fundamentals really well, but I haven't worked on open source Java technology stack for past 3 years, because when you work at Microsoft, you just don't get to work on an open source Java technology stack. It's all about .NET and Microsoft tech stack. So I was very open about it, but then I was confidently able to say that my computer science fundamentals are strong. I would need probably a couple months to ramp up and and just get used to Java, and that's about it. So it was more about like my self-confidence and highlighting the experience that I could bring to the company. That was like important part of my me getting a job at a startup.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I know I certainly get that question quite a bit from a careers perspective about how to articulate past experience and transferable skills when you're moving into a new role where you maybe don't meet 100% of the requirements. So really helpful to hear your process around that. And that takes me really nicely into the next question, which is kind of more about how you've been able to own your experience as somebody in the tech field. And I'd love to hear more about, and these questions have come specifically from students, but would love to hear about how you've learned to navigate the room or the group that you're in, the organization, whatever environment you're in, as sometimes the only woman or the only person of color, or perhaps the only parent in the room, and just how you've owned your skills and experience while facing some of the challenges that can come from being the only in a room or a group.
Yeah, it was not easy, or I would say intuitive. I really had no idea what I was getting into when I was, one of the few women in technology at that time, and things are getting really better nowadays, which is awesome. But then I particularly started facing some other challenges when I transitioned from being an individual contributor to being a manager role. I think that's where the number of women in the management positions were really, really low. Even like not just in software engineering, but engineering manager position. So I would say that's where I started to kind of feel that I'm minority. My voice is not being heard. Because as I said, like when I started out, I was too intimidated. I was oftentimes the only woman in managers meeting. And then I used to be really quiet, heads down, and work really hard. And I went above and beyond doing my job. That's the only thing that I cared about. And I always assumed that if I do a good job, everything else like salary raises or promotions will be taken care of. But then through some tough experiences, I learned that I learned early on in my management career that you have to be in a driver's seat of your own career, and you don't get anything without explicitly trying or asking. And the reason why I say that is that women feel imposter syndrome more profoundly than men. Especially if you look a little bit different or come from a different background. And I was not I don't look like a typical tech leader. I don't wear shorts and hoodies. I wear heels and stockings, which is like very different. There were people who have asked me in the past, this was again really early on in my career, is that, are you really an engineer? You don't look like an engineer. And my response to them would be like, what does an engineer look like? Is there a dress code that I'm missing? But those are the questions that people ask. And these are, I would say, some unconscious biases and stereotypes that I've had to go through, and like many other women in technology have gone through. There were other instances where in my early days of leading teams, I used to get feedback that I'm aggressive and hard charging and I hold people accountable. But my peers and male colleagues would get positive feedback for the leadership style, saying that they are more assertive. So I've had to go through all of that. But in the end, the way I would say I managed and navigated the room and some of these biases were really with just three simple fundamentals, right? One is the self-confidence, that I've always been a self-confident woman in terms of believing in myself. And then hard work. I mean, I've worked harder than anybody else, during my schooling days and during, all the opportunities that I got in my career. And then lastly, practice and preparations. I always felt like bar was always higher for me than my male colleagues. So I had to kind of practice and prepare for every meeting that I was presenting to in the beginning. And those are basically the three kind of simple tools that I've used to navigate the room and kind of combat these biases.
You just mentioned confidence as something that really helped you, and you mentioned that you've always had a lot of confidence, and some people seem to find confidence in themselves a little bit more easily than others. What advice would you have for a woman who is trying to break into the tech field, who maybe hasn't discovered that self-confidence yet and is still working on building it? What helped you build your confidence?
I think two things helped me build my confidence. I think one is my early experiences of, first of all, I mean, getting to where I was without any access to education and not having any money to study computer science, and, getting through all of those struggles early on, I think helped me build my confidence that, I can walk into a random person and, ask them like, I need a scholarship, for so and so. I think those were really profound experiences early on that just helped me get out there and talk to people and build my self-confidence. And then the second thing is that just my past journey of being able to learn computer and being able to learn English language at the same time, and while working, really hard, then harder than anyone else. I think those were kind of the experiences that made, and I was really successful at that, graduated at top of my class. So I think those were really the thing that helped me build the self-confidence. But I would say more importantly, it's about believing in yourself. And I've always, when I had to question my self-confidence, I think there were always the time where I asked I asked myself a question in terms of what's the worst thing that could happen. And I've made bold decisions with that one question. Like, the worst thing that could happen is that if the startup doesn't work out, I can always go back to Facebook. I can always go back to Microsoft. Those were the questions that I asked myself, and I would be critical of myself and debate with myself to be able to build that confidence. And then, then it was basically just the time of like, me speaking up in meetings and understanding that no idea is a bad idea was kind of the foundation of me building the self-confidence.
I love that. Asking whether or not what's the worst something, what is the worst thing that could happen if you do something? I think that's a good way to evaluate what the actual risks are. Sometimes I know for myself, I sometimes get myself psyched up about things. And when I actually stop to think about the consequences, it's not as big of a deal as in my head it seems to be upfront. So I love that.
Exactly.
Going back to something else you said before about feedback that you got about being, too aggressive was, I think, the word that you used in terms of your management or communication style. How, when you were getting that type of feedback, how did you still build and maintain relationships with peers and colleagues in a way that allowed you to move forward and move up in your career in the face of that feedback, or knowing that maybe other people were giving you that feedback?
Yeah, I think those were some of the hardest feedback to navigate because it was basically a moment where I had to think about I love getting feedback, by the way, but I think there's always this thing where you have to decide whether this is a real feedback or this is somebody else's bias. So I don't want to course correct myself with the feedback, and I made the decision, especially for this leadership feedback that I got, that hey, you come across as aggressive, or you are holding people accountable, and your leadership style is very different than what I'm used to as a female engineering manager. I would say that was more of me just basically talking to them openly about it, and then kind of sharing my intention that hey, this is not what I meant, or this is not what I intended to say. I'm open to your feedback, but then these things are really important for me to build a relationship. So just building the trust and relationship, and coming across vulnerable, I think was the important tool for me. It was more of like, look, I value your feedback, but at the same time, here is what I don't agree with, and coming across that as vulnerable and building the relationship. I just went at it. It was, to me, it was not about hiding from the feedback. It was more about working and building the relationship and making sure that I win the trust of people I work with was the important part of me getting over the feedback. And at the same time, I would say not course correcting myself, because at that time, if I had taken that feedback and course corrected myself, I don't think I would have, in this male dominated industry, I don't think I would have risen to the level or the opportunities that I've gotten in my career if I would have course corrected myself. So it was just me in terms making a right choice, and also investing more time in relationship building and trust building with my peers and stakeholders.
Bringing it full circle to having confidence in yourself. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'd love to dive into something a little bit more technical. How, and this is another question that came specifically from a student, but how do you tackle and approach code challenges? And what advice would you have for students on this front?
Yeah, I think so code challenges, or learning to code, is what I believe is that it's not anything different from learning anything new, for that matter, right? What that means is everyone has different learning methods, and my learning method has been, I firmly believe that if your fundamentals are clear, you can learn any programming language. Which is why, since the beginning of my career, I've never restricted myself to a particular technology stack. it is always more about, what's the product and the mission that excites me more. So in terms of me going about learning different coding challenges, it's learning more about the fundamentals, making my fundamentals more stronger. Reading the books on the fundamentals, I would say, could go a long way. And then lastly, I would say I learn everything by writing. Maybe this is, going back to my necessity of like writing code on a notepad. I still to date write my technology architecture diagram on a blank paper before I transform them into, a lucid chart or any really nice looking diagram. So it was more about approaching it from fundamentals and first principles perspective, and learning more to, I would say, to get your foundation strong are the important things that kind of allow me to stay on top of coding challenges. And then the other thing that I do is that now in my job, I get to interview a lot of people, both in my past companies and in my current role. So every question that I intend to ask candidates, I solve them myself without looking at, what the answer is. I mean, I have like 3 or 4 different solutions of that problem. And then I keep on doing that on pretty much like every month or every day. That keeps me on top of solving these coding challenges. So I would say 3 things: make your foundation strong, practice, and practice. The more you practice, the more you would get confident in your solutions. And then just use your best learning methodology. For me, it's writing and drawing diagrams on the blank paper. For you, it might be, doing this on a computer or an iPad. But I would say those are 3 things that has helped me learn through the coding challenges.
And I would love to talk to you about negotiations and how, when you've been moving from role to role, how have you approached your offer negotiations as a candidate? And any advice that you would have for other students?
Yeah. So during my first 3 or 4 years of my career, whether it was Microsoft or whether it was startup, I didn't negotiate at all. I took the first offer that Microsoft gave me, or first offer that startup gave me. And the reason why I didn't negotiate at that time was because I was very grateful that I got an offer to join these companies. And I honestly feared at that time that if I negotiate, they would withdraw the offer, which was like super naive perspective. But after working for a few years and after kind of getting burned through not negotiating it and getting paid lower than my male counterparts, I would say I became stronger in negotiating. And there are 2 things I would say that holds women back from negotiating. One is self-doubt, which I had on myself, during the first few years of my career. And then lastly, I would say women are more critical of themselves in terms of holding them to higher standards. So my negotiating advice would be learn your market value. That sounds really bad, but it is necessity. So before you negotiate your salary, I do my homework. I try to find how much people in my field at my level with my experience are making. Talk to my male friends about compensation, and don't shy away from that. These are all the data points that you're collecting to be able to negotiate the right way. And then going at it from that perspective that here is how much everybody else is making and I should be making, and knowing your worth is really important. And the thing that I found, which is super fascinating in negotiating, is that there is nothing wrong in asking. When you negotiate your offer with a company, no company is going to rescind their offer if you even ask for double the salary or triple the salary. Trust me, like no matter how crazy it sounds, no company is going to withdraw the offer. But there is a power to asking, right? When you ask for it and when you believe in it that you're worth that much, either they would make a counter offer to you or they would make their final offer. But not negotiating at all is the wrong move. And I would completely advise you all against not negotiating. Always make sure that you negotiate, and you negotiate hard, and there is nothing to lose.
I want to find a way to like make that into a GIF with audio that can just be like sent out to students anytime they get an offer. I completely agree with that. Awesome. Thank you so much, Namrata. I'm going to hand it back over to Britt now. We're getting some live questions coming through and want to make sure that we leave time for any live questions. So I'll kick it back over to Britt to lead that.
Yeah, so as Kathleen said, feel free to keep using the Q&A. Amanda, I know you've got a few questions that have come in, so I'll let you go first.
Thanks. Christian left a great question. They said, this meeting is so inspirational. She shows how hardworking, going above and beyond, and always achieving more can bring great results into anyone's life. From your experience, how do you identify an engineer that can bring the most value to a company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that to me, it's all about identifying the potential of the engineers. So what I look for in identifying the soft skills is really how hungry this person is to get the job. So there are two parts to me interviewing candidates. One is the core technical skills. So you need to have raw technical skills to be able to do the job that you're interviewing for, right? That's the basics. And then the second thing is that how hungry this person is to get the job. So oftentimes the way I test this is that give them, when I'm, having a coding problem or any problem during the interview question that I ask, I have found some people not able to solve that problem in the interview, but then without me prompting them, they go home, they solve that problem, and then they email me right back, which is an awesome way to kind of understand and learn that this person can go above and beyond. And through my personal experience, I would say that those are the type of people who can go above and beyond for the job are most valuable to you in your team than people with 10x more experience or 10x more technical skills, but if they're not willing to go above and beyond. So that's how I kind of look for the soft skills, is like being able to do things proactively and showing me how proactive they are, whether it's solving a problem or responding to my questions offline.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That gives me a lot of food for thought too. Our next question came from Izzy. In your time in leading engineers, what are some of the behaviors that you've noticed distinguish those that fit well as individual contributors versus those that fit well in management positions?
Yeah, I would say that transition from individual contributor to management happens at certain level and stage in your career. So after you have gone through, first 5 years, 6 years of experience doing individual contribution, the best transition to management is a natural transition. So what I mean by that is, it's not that, one day you wake up and, people applying and saying that I have done enough engineering work, now I want to manage. Like, that's no. When it comes to IC to management transition. But then there are a lot of opportunities that you can give in your team, which would be about, the opportunities that are open for grabs, or there are projects that there's nobody to kind of lead those projects, and people who rise organically and opt for leading the projects, those are kind of organic leaders in my view. And it's more about how well this person is able to cross-functionally work with people outside of the engineering team, and then how they execute projects and leading projects organically without being asked to lead. I think that's the most important criteria for me when I look for IC to management transition.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like confidence and grit is the theme I'm hearing over and over. Oh, I'm back.
And have a question from Tina. What is your vision for technology leadership here at Lambda, and what challenges are you working on these days?
Great question. So I think my first challenge that I'm working on here in Lambda School is really building our technology foundation. So we have had great curriculum. We have a great methodology in teaching our students and making our students successful. I think what we are missing is the strong technology foundation that allows us to do this at scale. What that means is we're able to do that at current student growth, but how would we scale our operations and finding the best opportunity for every student at scale? That's a harder question because we currently don't have a technology foundation to be able to support that, right? So what I mean by that is I am currently, which many of you may have heard, is leading the initiative of migrating us off of Airtable. Many of you have heard me saying that Airtable is a spreadsheet. It's not a database to me as a technologist. So that's my current challenge and the biggest challenge in laying the technology foundation. Once we have the right technology foundation, I want us to build products that allows us to do better admissions tracking and evaluate candidates before we enroll them in Lambda School, building tools and learning management systems and student information system for learning and school initiatives, and lastly, building matching algorithms and helping students find the right opportunities quickly and helping them prep for interviews on the outcomes side of things. So those are the products that I envision ourselves building after we have the technology foundation, and moving off of Airtable is my key initiative.
And as a follow-up to that, what are you most excited about, or what technology are you building at Lambda that you're most excited about?
The most excited about I am building the technology is building a real database and data analytics platform. So moving off from Airtable, meaning that building a real transactional database. And as you all are engineers and learning engineering skills, you can imagine how transactional database can be very different from managing Airtable spreadsheets. So I'm more excited about our data stack. And then on the front end, we're using the same stack as we teach students. So React and Node is what we are using on front end. And on the back end, we are laying the foundation using Go and Python.
And going back to what you mentioned earlier about sharpening your skills by strengthening your fundamental knowledge, what do you consider fundamentals? And then having moved from Coinbase to now Lambda and talking about finding Lambda on Twitter, what are some other habits or tools that you use to stay up to date with the tech industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's two questions. I'll answer that in part. First question is what I mean by fundamentals. To me, fundamentals meaning how computers work and how computers compile code and run code, and how exactly what happens when you write a line of code and that code basically gets converted into a bytecode and gets executed. So just learning the basics and how underlying systems work is to me fundamentals, including the data structures and algorithms. So I read a lot about data structures and algorithms because those are the tools that would help you solve the problem, regardless of what programming language that you choose to implement those data structures and algorithms. So three things: A, how computers work internally. Second, data structures and algorithms are the key to solving any computer problem, and regardless of the language. So that's that. The second question, I think, was how I stay up to date.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not big on Twitter as much as Austin and everyone else in Lambda is. But I think to me, Twitter is a great resource in terms of following the people who I really admire and aspire to be. So it's a great resource in terms of how people think, and what are some of the resources, just learning about it firsthand. So I would definitely recommend Twitter. And then the second is some technology sites, such as I'm a member of Forbes Technology Council. So if you look at Forbes Technology column on every week or every day, I think that gives you great insights into what are some of the new technologies coming up, what are some of the technology issues that people in different companies are facing. So that's a great resource that I'd recommend if you have not explored that before. And then lastly, news such as TechCrunch and in my world, CoinDesk to be on to be up to date on crypto.
And then how did you decide what feedback is valid versus what is biased? Azra submitted a question asking about just a little bit more clarity on that piece and some guidance there.
Yeah, I think it's basically I would say the first thing is that being open to feedback and the people and making it clear to people who you work with that, hey, you're hungry for feedback. I would love your feedback, and probing that feedback on a regular cadence, whether it's in terms of 360 or in, a monthly coffee chat. I would say make yourself vulnerable to the feedback. Unless you tell people that, hey, you're looking for it, people are not going to give you the feedback. That's one. And secondly, once you start receiving the feedback, I think the way to explore that is what's the where is the feedback coming from? I guess to me, when I received the feedback about my leadership style, early on, it was more about where is this feedback coming from? And, when I dug deeper into it, it was more about I have never seen, a female or a woman, leading, so aggressively or things like that. So to me, it was more about not the feedback on my style, but it was more about, the person's bias and expectations of how women should lead was driving that feedback. So to me, it was more about not taking that feedback and course correcting myself. So dig deeper into it, see what's driving it, and then you will be able to find specific instances why this person felt this way or why this person gave you this feedback. And once you know the root cause, you would be able to figure out whether it's a feedback, real feedback, or whether it's basically just a noise or someone's biases. And the third thing is, of course, volume, right? If there are 5 people coming in and telling you that your leadership style is not great, then I need to look into it versus one person telling me that hey, I felt this way, but I'm getting kind of great reviews, and I'm going above and beyond in my job role, and I'm succeeding in my job role. To me, it's basically kind of finding the false positives in the feedback is important based on the volume and based on finding the root of what that feedback is coming from.
Thank you. And thinking about your experience, how did you approach going to a large company and a long-standing company versus a startup? And what advice would you give to students who are looking at both options?
Yeah, so to me, I think my guiding principle has been that if I start becoming more comfortable in any job, it's time for me to look somewhere else because I'm really hungry to learn and challenge myself outside of comfort zone. So in a big companies, you can join a big company, and once you kind of get used to it, you can stay there forever, right? I mean, there will be no motivating factor for you to change your job. In fact, it'll be all against it. Like, I'm so comfortable with my job, I don't think I can make the move. And for me, that getting comfortable in the job has always been the driving factor of me doing something drastic that can make me learn new things. And in my personal experience, the reason why I've gone from big companies to startup and big companies is to learn, get variety of experiences, right? At big companies, it was more about working with large teams and managing dependencies. And then at Facebook, it was managing a large team and improving my management experience, because leading large teams is different from leading 3 people team at a startup, right? So those were great experiences. But then at startup, what I wanted to learn about how to build business from ground up and how to build teams from ground up, and that's why I decided to quit Facebook and joined a really small startup at that time. So to me, it's all about what I want to learn at this stage of the career, and then what's getting me closer to my goal has always been a guiding factor for me to choose different companies and stages of the companies.
And I guess a follow-up with that piece as well, when you think about transitioning into new roles or new companies, what are those things that you prioritize in those beginning early days with a company, and how do you immerse yourself into the culture pretty quickly?
Yeah, so I think first 30 days is just getting to know people. I would say first 30 days in every company that I've been part of, it's like meeting with people, grabbing coffees, and you're drinking more coffees than you're actually doing anything. And I think that's important. It's not, some people consider that's waste of time, but it's basically more people you learn, more people you meet with, more people you can learn from in terms of what the expectations of your role are. So for example, for me, it was a big transition moving into Coinbase, where I was managing a large team, and then that team already existed. So me, it was an important step for first 30 days, just meeting with my stakeholders and understanding what are their expectations of me and my team. What are some of the things that the team has not been able to do from payments perspective? That's their dependencies. So I think learning all of that is important. If you have not read this book, I would highly recommend to read the book called First 90 Days. First 90 days of your job, of any new job, is really important, and how to approach it, whether it's building relationship, building trust with people who you're going to be working with, and also just knowing the lay of the land is super important. And last but not the least is our first 90 days or first 30, 60 days, I focus on listening. Because you don't have a lot of context. And you have to appreciate, the work that people have done before you arrived in the company. So just learn and listen as much as possible, and then you can create your roadmap of, what are some of the top priorities that you're going to be working on. So read First 90 Days if you haven't yet.
Thank you. And just one final question, as we're wrapping up here, any final words of advice or tips for our participants today?
I think the best advice that I have received that I would give you all is have a seat at the table and let your voice be heard. Don't be intimidated regardless of the situation. Just make sure that, when you get an opportunity, let your voice heard. This advice was really important for me, especially at the time when I transitioned into management role, and everybody else in the room in every meeting that I went to were men, and I was the only woman, and I couldn't speak initially because I thought my ideas were dumb. But again, just have a seat at the table, and speak up. If you have a thought or an idea, participate in the conversation. That's really important, and that's what I would say has been a biggest guiding light for my career.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for sharing your story. It's always great to hear your experience. And thank you all to all of our students who are here today. We did record this, so we'll have it available for those of you who want to go back and watch it again. But thank you. We will let you get back to the rest of your days, and we will see you for our next session in a little bit.
Thank you for having me, guys. Bye.